Electrocast.
Why wait to see if you'll get something you like this Valentine's Day when you can go to BlueNile.com and find something you'll love? Whether you're looking to treat yourself to a little winter sparkle or show a galentine how much you appreciate them, Blue Nile offers a wide selection of high-quality designs, expert guidance, and free 30-day returns for the ultimate peace of mind. You can even design your own jewelry. Right now, save up to 50% at BlueNile.com. That's BlueNile.com.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. From the launch your online shop stage, all the way to the we just hit 1 million orders stage. No matter what stage you're in, Shopify's there to help you grow. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/special offer, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/special offer.
On this episode of Missing the Point, we deliver another edition of Cheap Heat. Mike, Dave, Ray, and Craig look back at one of the most famous and infamous moments in the history of professional wrestling, the Montreal Screwjob. From the very beginning of the feud between Bret the Hitman Hart and the Heartbreak Kid Shawn Michaels, to the fated night in 1997. We'll look to find the causes and ultimately assign blame to one of wrestling's most famous moments. But first, some housekeeping. Missing the Point is a 1-hour weekly podcast recapping the biggest stories in the world of sports with a New England flavor. The show notes and transcript of today's episode can be found in the description box below, as well as on our website, www.mtpshow.com. If you're new to the show, consider subscribing. It's the easiest way to see when we publish new episodes. We are on iTunes, Spotify, Google, and wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to rate us and leave a review of any of our shows. We always appreciate your feedback. Let us know how we're doing. Also, be sure to follow us on all of our social medias. All of our links will be in the show notes. And check out our brand new website, www.mtpshow.com. That's mtpshow.com. And now, this is Missing...
Welcome, everyone, to episode 2 of Cheap Heat. I am your host, Michael Marcangelo, joined, as always, by Rayshawn Buchanan. And the EP now always comes out for the microphone for this show, Craig D'Alessandro.
Damn right.
And today, we actually have a surprise guest, someone that is on most of our shows, but you would not peg as a wrestling podcaster. What I will say is that the entirety of this show was spawned by Rayshawn Buchanan. In a Slack message 2 days ago, he sent us a little picture that said, who would you remove? Shawn Michaels, Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Undertaker, The Rock. And this special guest said Shawn. That man is DK Sizzle, Dave Clarke. And today we are talking about the Montreal Screwjob. We are talking about the rivalry between the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels, my favorite, and the best there is, the best there was, and the best that there ever will be, DK's favorite, Bret Hart. So DK, welcome to Cheap Heat.
I'm honored. I'm honored. I've been a fan of this podcast since the very first episode, and I can't believe I'm finally here talking to the real deal. This crew. I mean, I feel so lucky that I can come on and defend the honor of Canada's favorite son, my favorite wrestler of all time, Bret the Hitman Hart, and the Hart Foundation. Yeah, I'm really happy to be here, and I can't wait to get into it with you guys. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and I think, for all of us, we were planning on doing another show right around Royal Rumble time. We had just done a Survivor Series show. We touched on the screw job, and it's been 23 years since that happened. But we are now approaching the 11-year anniversary of when Bret the Hitman Hart made his return to WWE television and made amends with Shawn Michaels. So we just passed
we would have just passed the Screwjob anniversary too, right? That was in November.
Yeah. We touched on the Survivor Series show, but we didn't do a dedicated show. But leave it to Ray to stir the fucking pot and to bring you out of the woodwork to just go after my boy Shawn Michaels. So the topic of today's show is going to be the events leading up to the screw job, the actual screw job itself, the aftermath for both competitors and even Vince and the company. And then I think finally the conclusion of this show, we will say who is to blame. I will give you a spoiler. I blame Bret. DK blames everybody but Bret.
I mean, I blame Vince. If I had to pick one person, I blame Vince. I think that it's tough to peg anyone else with individual responsibility. I think there's a lot of people that had hands in it. I think there's people that were bystanders and let it happen that shouldn't have. But if I was going to bring charges in a court of law or in the squared circle, it would be with Vince McMahon.
Okay. Now, with Craig and Rayshawn, we're talking about two of the greatest in-ring performers in probably wrestling history, right? Bret Hart is a top 5 in my book. Shawn's number 1. I just think he was as an all-around performer. But for you guys, when we're talking about Bret, we're talking about Shawn. Craig, will go to you first. Like, what comes to mind?
As far as storytelling and technical wrestling, for me, it's always been Bret Hart and Ric Flair, because those two have been, in my mind, most, been able to tell a story. I don't think those two could do it much more than anyone else. Shawn Michaels could just entertain, and he could still do it now when they get paid billions of dollars to fight in another country. But that's another story for another day. But as far as I enjoy the technical aspect of wrestling, and as far as that goes, it's Bret and it's Ric Flair, and there there are a couple of others, but that's another conversation for another day. We're focusing on Bret Hart right now, and there's no doubt that Bret Hart's been one of the most entertaining in-ring performers in the history of wrestling, not just WWE, WWF, but any of the federation.
Yeah, I mean that's so true. And when I think about those two guys, I think about two guys that carried the business in the '90s, right? They were part of tag teams, legendary tag teams in the early '90s. Shawn Michaels has that moment when he Sweet Chin Music's Marty Jannetty through Brutus Beefcake's window, and he finally goes solo, and then Bret Hart breaks apart from the Hart Foundation and goes on a solo run and just has a great run. So like I said, it can't be stated enough. Bret Hart as a technical wrestler probably is the best, and like Grant, that was his motto. I'm the best there is, the best there was, the best there ever will be. And then, as we know, as an entertainer, but really as a performer too. Like, he entertained with his dancing and his moves, and obviously had a great theme song. I'm talking about Shawn Michaels there. It was just awesome to see these guys go at it in the '90s. And really, the rivalry really lasted really over 20 years. It wasn't just something that happened through the 90s. Like, it was at its peak in the 90s, obviously, because they was both peak performers. But like I said, I just think about two guys that carried the business in the 90s, and the business is not where it is today had it not been for that rivalry at that time.
Yeah, if you look at it, right, like wrestling in the 80s was Hulk Hogan, Ultimate Warrior, Andre the Giant. It was especially for the WWE.
The Macho Man, Randy Savage.
Yeah, with the exception of a few though, like in the 80s, especially in the WWF, it was those jacked up 6'6", 300-pound beefcakes, and then you had guys, sprinkled in there like Macho Man, Ricky Steamboat, that could work, Jake Roberts. But it wasn't until Bret and Shawn had their tag teams with the Rockers and the Hart Foundation, and they kind of broke apart, that you saw the next iteration of what wrestling was going to be. People that could actually go in there and work for more than 10 minutes.
Yeah, and I think you have to give, and obviously we've established my bias for Bret Hart right off the bat, but I think you have to give Bret a lot of credit for that transition, because in the 80s, you had Hulk Hogan essentially carry wrestling. A lot of those guys that you just mentioned do deserve credit, but Hulk Hogan was the face of the Federation for the entire decade, pretty much. And when the steroid scandal hit, and McMahon, as we all know, became dangerously close to going under, like that it almost ruined him. If it wasn't for kind of a bad litigation and kind of sketchy doctor's notes, the WWF as we know it wouldn't be here. But Bret comes in and is with the guys you have left on the roster after this scandal. Bret is the only viable and best option to become a champion. Randy Savage is old by that point. A lot of the guys that are left from that kind of steroid era or jacked up era or Hogan era, whatever you want to call it, they're just not, there's nobody viable to give the belt to and to carry the Federation. And then, here comes Bret, and he breaks off from the tag teams, goes on this solo run, and he's perfect. He just completely fits the bill. And I just think he deserves a ton of credit for that initial championship, really helping the federation out.
Yeah, I mean, listen, Vince knew that he was in trouble, right? Obviously, with the steroid scandal, which is why
it wouldn't be the first time either.
Yeah, if you think back in 1991, he went and plucked out Ric Flair from WCW at the time to bring in someone that could actually keep people in the building as a main eventer, wrestle a 30-minute match instead of what Hogan was doing. In case, by the way, just so that you guys know, a little bit of a side note. This is when Vince McMahon did sign over control of WWF at the time to his wife, Linda McMahon, to make her the CEO because he thought he was going to prison. So he wanted to keep the company afloat.
Because he had his hands on the steroid stuff, right? Like the charges weren't being brought against the WWF. The charges were getting brought against Vince McMahon for supplying his athletes with.
Because he did start like a weightlifting federation, and that's where it all spawned from.
And that weird urologist in Hershey, Pennsylvania, or whatever was going on. It's all very strange.
Yeah, it's all very. But this, I mean, this is another thing, right? Wrestling is not a sport,
right?
So how can you say that steroids should not be allowed in there? Like they don't drug test you at the Emmys. They probably should, but they don't. This is not a real sport. But I digress. So Bret Hart wins the title from Ric Flair in 1992. He is the guy in that company. You know, there were a couple champions between 1992 and 1996, like Diesel, Bob Backlund. Those were just Bret Hart was the face of that company.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Mike. He was the Intercontinental champ before that, which I think was typically given to it was kind of a technical wrestler champ or, a belt that you would give to somebody that wasn't from the US, and you wouldn't usually see that leap, right? Or am I totally off base there?
Well, that title was the workhorse title, right? Like guys like Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, who never won a WWE championship, but Macho Man Randy Savage did. He held that title first and then went on to be a WWF champion. So the theory here is, and you can jump in if you want, Ray, is that if you were good enough to be Intercontinental champion, it meant that you could have a 25 to 30-minute match. You could bring people into the building or make sure that they're happy for being brought in because of Hogan. And that means the company had, future plans.
Yeah. I mean, that's how that title in the 90s, even before they had like serious prestige, right? So, if you were giving that, it was given to the upper mid card guy. So, you wasn't maybe the main event. I mean, now there was some main events for the IC title in the 90s. So you want to go to WrestleMania 10 with Shawn Michaels and Razor Ramon. We talked about it before. Yeah, we talked about it before we got on the air. But the match with British Bulldog and Bret Hart at Wembley Stadium at SummerSlam in '92, like those matches really they were main events. And so if you was given that title, they was like, you know what, you may not be the guy right now, but you are next up. But also, like we talked about, Vince knew that he could
trust you.
Yeah, exactly. He could trust you, right? He could trust Bret. And he knew that Bret wasn't going to let him down or let the company down. So that's where that stemmed from. And like I said, he hit on Bret, and it was gold from 92 on.
Yeah, and the same thing, right? So these two, Bret and Shawn, were pretty much placed on a collision course the second they were both in WWF, right? Their tag team, their tag teams were identically relevant and popular with the fan base. When the Hart Foundation was bad, everybody hated them. When they were good, everyone wanted to see them win. They were one of the best tag teams, if not the best. You want to say like the Road Warriors, Harlem Heat. I think that it's the Hart Foundation and everybody else. The Rockers were the first incarnation of like the Hardy Boys, Edge and Christian, right? The high flying technical aspect that would just really like wow the guys, wow the girls, everything like that. But it was at this time, as they're kind of climbing through the ranks, where the collision course was set. Bret and Shawn faced off in 1992. Nobody really remembers that match. I do. I watched it. It was a clinic. Those two could wrestle. I'll say this, and DK, listen to me because I do love Bret Hart. Bret Hart could have a 5-star match with a broomstick. I believe it. I think Shawn could do the same, right? But if you think about it, like their careers are both going on the upward trajectory. Bret Hart is champion. He gets screwed out of the belt in 93 because Hogan comes back and they want him to beat Yokozuna at WrestleMania 9. Go ahead.
So I have something to say about this. So however long Bret has the belt for at this point, right? Was it a year? Maybe less. Yeah. So the Yokozuna thing is the first example of Bret Hart being treated as a placeholder by Vince McMahon in the WWF, formerly known WWF. He is always, and this is where it starts, always used as a champion until Vince thinks there's something better to come along. And it's, to me, a little disrespectful to Bret Hart. And at this point, you know, Bret's always loyal. With like that'll be a through line to what we say through the entirety of this podcast. But this is where it starts. There's stories, you know, believe who you want, but there's stories about his interactions, Bret's interactions with Hulk Hogan. You know, Vince McMahon allegedly told Bret that Hulk says he'd never drop the belt to you. You're not fit to lace up his boots. He's only going to drop the belt to Yokozuna. You know, it's he confronts Hogan about this. Vince says, "Oh, you just heard what you want to hear, Bret." That to me is the very first seed planted by Vince that says I can treat Bret Hart however I want. This is it's the preamble to the Montreal Screwjob. So it's important, I think, to point that out because Hogan still got the clout. You know, it's funny. Yokozuna is not talked about as much as today as he was popular at the time. You know, like he got really big really fast. No pun intended. And his popularity was undeniable. But Bret was the champ. You know, like he was the champ for a year, and he should have gotten some sort of respect to try to get that belt drop back to him. Something like that should have happened, or Hogan should have dropped the belt to him. Maybe Yokozuna takes it off him after that. You could have kept that storyline going. It's the first example of him getting skipped over by Vince, and it's certainly not the last.
Right, but I think that's how Hogan was at that time. Because even whether it was WWF at the time or WCW, like if Hogan didn't feel that he could draw money with you, then you know you got put on the back burner. And so, I mean, you know,
and Bret wasn't Bret yet. I get
right,
that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what happened. So, I mean, remember, you know, Taker comes in, you know, it's not about Taker, but we talked about it on the last episode, but, you know, Taker comes in, you know, it's like, man, this guy's 6'10", 320, well, that's what he was being billed as. And, you know, he drops the title the next year to him at Survivor Series. You know, that was his first championship run. So it's like, you know, it just goes back to that. Like, you know, if they don't think you can draw money and they think, you know, and granted, like you said, Bret was a 6'8", 320 pounds. You know, he was 6 feet, you know, 234, 240. So, you know, not a small guy by normal stature, but compared to what most of the guys drew money, like he wasn't a Warrior. He wasn't Andre the Giant. He wasn't any of those guys. So, you know, Vince for the longest time hasn't put stock in guys that are that small, except Bret and Shawn. And I say it started with those guys, so that's what happened.
But did his draw in Canada, was his draw in Canada big at that point yet? No. Like, did he have that kind of pull yet? So,
well, he was definitely bigger. A lot of them were bigger overseas than they were in the States, and I think
he wasn't Bret Hart in Canada, most popular man in Canada, can draw a crowd anywhere he goes. You know what I mean? Like if he's buying tampons at the Walmart, he'll get 30,000 people watching him. Like, you know, he's not there yet. I get that.
No, at this point in time, like 92, 93, Bret was very, very, very well liked internationally, because international fans, wrestling fans, are typically what they call "quote unquote" smarter wrestling fans, right? So they always, they're smart,
right.
So he was always beloved. I think what we saw there in WrestleMania 9 in 1993 was just a byproduct of Vince going back to the well one too many times with Hogan. He thought he was going to cash in Hulkamania one more time, and also from Hogan's perspective, Bret isn't Bret. And I think like at that point in time, Hogan would look at things through the prism of, will people care if I body slam him, brother? Right. And nobody's going to care if Hogan's body slams Bret. If he body slams Hogan or Yokozuna, the whole place is going to go nuts.
Sure. But I'm not asking for Hogan to care. I'm asking at that point for Vince to care, because Bret.
Well, the two were tied. I mean,
sure. I get it. But Bret did pull him out of the steroid era mess that Hogan got him into actually got him off of at the end of it. Right. But that he was representative of, Bret did save the company in some ways there, you know? So I'm just saying Vince, again, is where I'm pointing the blame. I mean, it's easy to blame Hulk Hogan for a lot of things. He's done a lot of terrible things in his life, but the blame for me, again, starts there with Vince and ends at the screw job with Vince. But yes, go on.
But I mean, do you blame Vince though? Do you blame
Not
Vince
for the first one? Not for the first one.
No, I'm saying but for going to the well though. Like, 'cause I mean, you said.
No, not at all. Not in the first one. Not when it came to overlooking him for Yokozuna, and not for how that stuff played out. Like, I think maybe in retrospect, if he had known what Bret was going to be, sure. But like I said, he wasn't Bret yet. I don't blame him for that, but I think it starts to set a precedent, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so too. And then now we fast forward to 1994. It's WrestleMania 10th anniversary of Vince McMahon's biggest gamble in the wrestling industry that has paid off. On this, the opening match of WrestleMania 10 was Bret versus Owen. And when I tell you that this is one of the top 10 matches of all time, I mean it. I mean, the story that they told without saying any words in that match was incredible. Bret did the job. He put his brother over, which catapulted Owen into about a year-long feud with Bret. And then he had another great match with
Superflex from the top of the cage. Can't forget that.
Yeah, that's SummerSlam in '94.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then, but at WrestleMania 10, Bret wrestled twice. He was in the main event against Yokozuna for the WWF Championship and won. But people don't really remember that. What they remember from that night is a little thing called the ladder match between Razor Ramon and Shawn Michaels, which stole the entire show. A little bit of a backstory on that. That match was not the first ladder match in WWF history. It was the first televised one, but it was proposed by Bret. Bret said he thought he and Shawn could steal the show. And what happened was Shawn was in that meeting. Shawn went to Vince and said, I want to do it with Scott, his buddy. So they did it. They stole the show. That's where real tension starts arising. But just for you guys, Craig, WrestleMania 10, what is your biggest takeaway?
I do remember that match happened, and then nobody cared about the rest of the card. That match just dominated that entire card because you had Razor Ramon, who was the biggest, one of the biggest heels at the time. It might have been his biggest match to that point. Then he had
he was the biggest heel at the time. He was like my first heel. I remember him so clearly. It's like my first big heel.
And then you had that match, which went for a while, and then it seems like everyone just forgets the rest of that card even happened.
I remember the Razor Ramon Shawn Michaels match more than even the Owen Hart and Bret Hart match now. Although it was a great match, like I'm not saying that it wasn't, obviously it was, but they were two of the best at that time. But that's where that coin phrase, Mr. WrestleMania, that Shawn Michaels was dubbed, that's where it began. And yeah, to put it to, you're in Madison Square Garden, the biggest stage. Really, and like when it comes to WWF, like that's their territory. Like no other company could come in there. Like that's another fun fact. No other wrestling territory could come into Madison Square Garden, but the WWE or WWF at the time. So that was a phenomenal match. He puts over Razor Ramon. I think it was an undisputed match, right?
So the backstory of that was Shawn actually was suspended for I think 90 days because he tested positive for, I think it was steroids, but he claims that he was never actually taking steroids. And if you look at him, he just never looked at that point in time like he was.
Really, his whole career. Maybe except for the run in 2002, maybe when he came back, he was a little jacked. He was super jacked in 2002.
He was sent home, and Vince said, we need the belt. And Shawn said, I have it. Come get it. And so they created a new belt for Razor, and this was like the unification match. The reason why I bring this up is I think, Dave, just to keep telling the story about how much parallel there was between these two careers, because they were both in a perfect world, there would be in one generation a Shawn Michaels and then the next generation of Bret Hart, or either or. In the 90s, they were both there at the same time and they both couldn't be the man. So now, we're coming off the heels of WrestleMania 10. The next couple of years, things get a little bit hairy for Shawn. He was obviously he will even tell you that he was a bad person backstage. He didn't have his personal life in order. There was a time in 1995 where he mouthed off to, I believe it was a Marine at a bar, and was jumped by 10 people, got his ass handed to him. He then had to relinquish the title again because he wasn't fit to perform. All the while, Bret is the workhorse.
Yeah, I mean, Bret claims himself he missed 2 days in the entirety of his WWE career. I mean, he's ultimate professional.
Always showed up, always delivered, which brings us to Royal Rumble 1996. Shawn had already won the one back in 1995, gone into WrestleMania 11, lost to Kevin Nash. Diesel, that's his friend. It's fine.
So just to interject here. Sorry. At this point, if we're skipping ahead,
Yep.
Lex Luger's already stolen SummerSlam from Bret, right? At this point, because that was in 95.
He stole the Royal Rumble from Bret in 1994, which is why they
so they try him out as champion. It doesn't work. He can't put asses in seats. They try, like you just mentioned, Diesel out as champion. It doesn't work at all because they have the famous what do they used to call it? The house party, the house viewer thing.
Oh, in your house.
In your house thing that did like the worst numbers of a pre-recorded WWF event like of all time. They immediately get Diesel out both times. Both champions don't work out. Who do they go back to? They go back to Bret because he's like Mr. Consistency, like you were just saying. He's a good company man. At the start of the 90s, he's a good company man. With the Yokozuna stuff, he's a good company man. After Lex Luger turns out to suck, he's a good company man. After Diesel turns out to not be able to sell tickets. And that then brings us up to date. I just do want to skip that stuff because it's important for Bret's resume, I think.
They were so desperate to make Lex Luger work.
It seemed to me that they were desperate to make anyone but Bret work. That's how I view it.
That they did never put the belt on Lex.
No,
Did they not?
No.
Well, but I'll tell you why it was confused in my head. Because Bret Hart is Mr. SummerSlam. So if he loses at a SummerSlam or at a Royal Rumble, that feels almost worse to me than a WWF championship.
So you know what it was with Les Luger though, like because now we already talked about Hulk Hogan going away and not being that guy, and we're trying to figure out what's going to be next. They were looking to make Lex Luger the next Hulk Hogan. Yep. That was the problem.
The Lex Express.
The Lex Express had the tour bus, and he's wearing the red, white, and blue.
They sent him all around the country. That's right. Yeah.
So it was just like he just didn't have the personality, or he couldn't draw the people in like.
But that year that they're doing that with Lex Luger, Bret Hart's working away and gets feud of the year with Jerry Lawler. And that's the best storyline of that year, like that's the best thing that we see all year. So it's like, you can keep skipping him, you can keep looking him over, but he's your best option still, because like you said, Shawn's out of the picture by his own decisions at that point. So
right, and I think that's sets up for what happens for WrestleMania 12. So
yep. So great segue, Ray. So Shawn Michaels wins his comeback match in the 1996 Royal Rumble. He goes on, and they're going to then. This is a story that we all wanted to see. It was Shawn Michaels against Bret Hart. Both of them were baby faces. They're good guys. So what the WWE did here in the lead up, they made Shawn look like Jean-Claude Van Damme. I mean, if you go back and you look at some of the video clips, he was doing upside down push-ups. He was just doing everything. And they sent a film crew up to Calgary to show Bret training, but he had just had I think like meniscus surgery. So they got a clip of him running, and he was running in the winter. He wasn't running fast. He looked like an old man. They had video clips of him swimming. He can't swim. He admitted that, and so he felt like Bret felt like
they did like Rocky montages, right? Like that was the big thing. Like they were
Shawn
trying to
running up the bleachers. Like I said, doing the upside down put. It was unbelievable. Mm-hmm. So Bret feels like WWF is pushing Shawn at his expense, and he felt disrespected by the way that he was being presented. This was the first of what was supposed to be 3 matches. Behind the scenes, Bret agreed to drop the belt and help launch Shawn, with the understanding that this would set up a series of 3 WrestleMania main events, culminating with Shawn beating him for the second 2 out of 3 times at WrestleMania 14. So this match, 60-minute Iron Man match, had never happened in WWE before. Vince was very, very apprehensive to put an hour-long match on a pay-per-view. Business was not great at this time. WCW was really just – they weren't kicking their ass yet, but they were getting all the stars. They already had Luger. They already had Hogan. They already had Sting. Ric Flair, literally the list goes on.
Did the championship steal happen with the women's champ yet?
Yep. So in 1995,
it was 95, right?
Yeah. So in 1995, Alundra Blaze defected to WCW, showed
Threw
up
the belt in the trash
as Medusa on live television. This is very important. I'm glad that you brought it up, Dave. On live television, on a live Nitro, she said that this title was meaningless and dropped the WWF Championship into the trash can. That's an important little tidbit to hang on to.
I knew it was going to come up. So
yeah. Once we get to the screw job. But I want to just say WrestleMania 12 Iron Man match. Those two put on. I still think if you have the attention span to go back and watch this, it for me that match is perfect.
It's probably the best main event of all time, I think.
It's absolutely perfect, and it's because those two were 1 and 1A in my opinion. And I know Bret is your number one, DK, but he could not. I mean, I did say earlier that he could have a 5-star match with the broomstick, but that match told the story of all stories.
Even though, obviously, spoiler alert, it happened 30 years ago. But even though Sweet Chin Music ends it for Bret that night, it's my favorite, probably my favorite Bret Hart match. I have a couple in my head, but I think it's probably my favorite Bret Hart match. Like you said, if you have the stamina to go back and watch it, as far as a balance of styles, high flying, acrobatic style versus perfect technical wrestling, submissions. And just expert storytelling from both guys. So if you do have the patience to go back and watch it, if you wanted to get somebody into into wrestling, into WrestleManias, into anything like that, and they have a spare hour, that's the match I would show them.
All right, Ray, I saw you nodding your head over there. Ray, what are your takeaways from the Iron Man match?
No, that, like you said, it's a top 5 match of all time. See, to me, the best match of WrestleMania does involve Shawn Michaels, but it wasn't WrestleMania 12. It was actually WrestleMania 25, but we'll get into that another time. That was a perfect story as well, but once again, don't want to get into that. But, I mean, it's funny because I think when Shawn Michaels got into the Hall of Fame in 2011, he talked about how, no one really thought that they would be able to buy an hour, like an hour match, So the fact that they were able to tell their story, like you said, and really keep the audience captivated was just phenomenal. So it just spoke to how styles do make a fight, and that when you put those two guys together, despite working themselves into a shoot and Bret feeling disrespected and Shawn Michaels being crazy backstage and doing crazy stuff all over the place, it just showed that when those guys came together, magic was created, and they just knew how to steal a crowd, and they knew how to put on a match no matter the time frame. But I can't believe that we didn't bring this up either. His entrance, my God, his entrance coming in when, there's no, listen, I want to make it clear. There's no way in hell I would have zip lined down to the ring. No way, no how. Like, granted, I don't know why he chose to do that. There's a story that Vince chose to do it, beforehand, which I guess you can give credit to Vince, that Vince won't do anything that he's not willing to do. Hence is why I think that's why the Screwjob came, but we'll get into that shortly. But man, I mean that was just phenomenal in itself. Like, I was captivated by the entrance in itself, and it's like, oh, Shawn Michaels coming down, it's just so it was just like, I'll never forget that. And then, like I said, at the end when he says, the boyhood dream has come true, and it really did. So like I said, phenomenal match overall, great story told, and like I said, we really found out the best was still yet to come.
The face-off at the start, like, it had the heat of a Muhammad Ali, George Foreman, Rumble in the Jungle boxing match. Like, they're facing off. They don't even dislike each other really by this point. Nope. Not to the degree that they're going to. Maybe something's bubbling for Bret already, but I remember so clearly being a little kid and watching this. I mean, we're all the same age for you guys at home, and like, we're all kids when this is happening. Like, we're talking elementary school here.
I was 8.
I was 7, I think. And I remember their face off so clearly. You could feel it. It was electric, and in the sports entertainment world, in WWF wrestling, to create something that tense as their face off before an Iron Man match is so rare and difficult to do. And a big part of it, I think, was because they were about to do it for a goddamn hour. What I mean? Like, these two guys knew they were in for it.
Yep. They
knew they were in for a hell of a workout, some pain, and probably both of their best matches ever. So it's sad. Like, what Ray was just talking right there. It makes me sad sometimes when I think about the animosity that eventually grew between these two guys that kind of never really got any closure, not in any real sense, because they elevated each other so much. And this is the prime example of that. Like this WrestleMania is the prime example of that being such great foils for one another and helping each other out so much, because they, like you said, they're perfect. They're both perfect. You could analyze that match from top to bottom and you couldn't find a mistake from either guy. You know, they keep each other safe. They pull off every single move, and like Ray was saying, they tell the story. So it's like, It's amazing.
I think the best part about that match for me is that nowadays, if you have a 60-minute Iron Man match, like the ending is like 5-4. That was 1-0, and it went to overtime. It took 63 minutes or so for one of them to keep their shoulders down for 3 seconds or longer, or to tap out. So that's how you protect the loser, in a sense like that. It was only for 3 seconds, right? It was one kick, 3 seconds.
And there was a timer, right? Am I remembering this correctly?
So time expired. So how this match unfolded was time expired while Bret had Shawn in the sharpshooter.
That's right.
Bret's walking down the aisle with the title, and Gorilla Monsoon comes out and says, "This match will now go to sudden death." And within 3 minutes of sudden death, Shawn sweet chins him 1, 2, 3, and this is where one of the biggest seeds was actually sown for this rivalry. Shawn can be seen and heard when he has the title.
Get him out of my ring.
Saying, "Get him out of my effing ring." Bret heard it.
I love it. I love it, though. I love it. Get out of my ring.
He was saying, "This is my moment.
I'm the man. I'm the champ, baby."
This is my moment because and I'm not trying to let Shawn off the hook, but maybe he was just excited. Yeah. I mean, I would take that personally too if I was Bret Hart, but
you should be excited though. That is, that's your first world title run. Like, yeah, I want everybody out the ring except me and the ref. Raise my hand. Let me go. And
he could have been a little nicer about it. I mean, Bret was putting him over.
I guess, but it's a cutthroat business, baby.
As we'll go on to learn.
As we find out very quickly. But for that night, I'm not gonna lie. I probably would have said something close to that. Like I'd have been like, I'm the champ. Like I am the man. And since I'm a jerk when it comes to stuff like that, I probably would have been like, now I'm the best there is.
Yeah,
the best there was. And
oh my god, can you imagine if he said something like that? That rivalry would have accelerated a lot faster than it did, man. That would have been too far.
That'd have been beautiful though.
I think the goal of any wrestling match or moment is to suspend disbelief, right? Is to make everyone at home think this is actually real. Like they make you forget that this is all work. Right. I think sometimes that does transcend to the athletes in and of themselves. I think Shawn's a dick. I think he was a dick then. I think that was a dick move for him to pull. I think, before this match, it was understood. Bret had let everybody know that he's going to take some time off. He had not taken time off in 10 years. He was filming a TV show that was canceled. Well, he was going to leave, and he and Shawn had agreed. You know what? After this match, the boys already think that we hate each other. Let's keep doing that. Let's just make sure that you and I talk to each other so that we don't cross any lines.
Yeah.
We don't cross any lines, but let's build this because this is going to be a 3-year feud. So Bret storms out and he's gone from March of 1996 until November of 1996. During that summer off, he signs an unprecedented 20-year, $20 million contract with WWF.
Oh wait, hold on a second. Fill me in here because I thought the 20-year, $20 million contract, and I could be wrong here, but I thought the $20 million 20-year contract was, oh yes, you're right, actually, sorry. Because during the time off, he goes and he gets an offer from WCW, from Ted Turner's company. He goes back to Vince. He says, I got an offer from WCW. Can you match it? Vince says, no, I can't match that. That's crazy money. Because it was what, $3 million a year for 9 years, or $9 million for 3 years.
3 years,
Yeah. So that happens, and then Vince says no, but then Vince comes back with this bonkers contract with all these kind of rules and stuff. So, okay, yes, I'm caught up. Thank you.
Yeah, so the whole premise here from Vince was to make Bret Hart the Babe Ruth of WWF, so that he could always be around, he could always come back, and then he would never leave.
He used those words, right? He said that to Bret.
Yeah, I want to make you the Babe Ruth. Mm-hmm. So they agree, they work out their deal, when this whole thing is going on, one of the things that Bret said is, I think you should work with Steve. He told Shawn that. I think you should work with Steve because Steve's a great worker. Shawn said, I'm going to work with Diesel, Razor, Hunter, and the Kid.
That's his click. That click is then established, right?
That's the click. Little did Shawn know that Razor and Diesel would sign the most lucrative contracts that, in wrestling history. The first ever contracts that were guaranteed money at that point for no date. So they were going to get paid no matter what. And they would go off to WCW. They would then form the NWO over the summer of 1996, which again, that moment there's no Attitude Era without the NWO. There's no guaranteed money without the NWO. Wrestling is not wrestling without that. But Shawn had nobody to work with, right? So he's working with Vader. He's working with Psycho Sid. Bret comes back.
He has issues with Vader too, right? Did I make that up?
SummerSlam 96.
Everyone had issues with Vader.
Yeah, Vader wasn't. Yeah. Well, especially that one guy on the Kuwait interview. Did you guys ever see that?
Yep.
Him and Taker. Sorry to do a quick tangent here, but Craig can cut this out later if it's no good. But it's a hilarious video if anyone wants to check it out at home. Vader and Taker are inexplicably in the Middle East on a tour, and it's during the is wrestling fake, is wrestling not fake era, right? Like where it's kind of like wrestling secrets revealed on on TNT or whatever on USA, and some poor Kuwaiti journalist says, "Hey, I heard it's fake. Is it fake?" And Taker's like, it's whatever. Gives a very diplomatic answer, and then Vader flips the table and picks the guy up by his tie and spends 2 weeks, I think, in a Kuwaiti jail because of the extradition laws. Because Vader was an absolute hothead. He had his mask on in the interview, which was hilarious. I love that character, by the way. But apparently nobody really liked working with him. But I mean, he was really good for some good moments.
It's because he had the stigma of being stiff. Like he would actually hit. He was kind of reckless. In the Shawn match at SummerSlam,
a lot of the big guys were back then, I feel like.
Yeah, but
except for Taker.
Yeah, at the SummerSlam
different kind of big. But yeah, sorry, go on, Mike.
Yeah. In the SummerSlam match, he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and you can hear Shawn say, "Are you fucking stupid?" Right? Like, so he broke it again. Like you're not supposed to do that in the ring. So Bret comes back, has a fire match with Stone Cold Steve Austin at Survivor Series of 1996. This was their first. Their most famous one happened at WrestleMania 13. This one was a clinic. Shawn loses the belt.
That's the Crimson Mask match, isn't it?
That's 13. Survivor Series was a technical wrestling. I mean, it was unbelievable. Unbelievable. Somehow Austin.
Why don't I remember this Survivor Series you're talking about?
You won't. So on this Survivor Series, Austin lost to Bret, but he looked like $1 million. The Rock debuted as Rocky Maivia.
This isn't the. I do remember that. Yes, now I do, and they booed him. 96. They booed him. They booed The Rock for this was his debut. They booed him. Yes, I remember. He
comes out looking like a moron.
Looked
with
ridiculous.
His little blue and white tassels.
Okay,
it was awful.
Okay. I'm caught
Die
up.
Rocky die, all that stuff.
And
right.
Also, it's the most visceral crowd in the world. It's Madison Square Garden. Those are the smartest of smart fans.
Vince McMahon always said it's the yardstick for the WWF and WWE. It's if you get over Shawn's getting booed at Madison Square Garden. If this guy's getting booed, if this guy's getting cheered, that's what we go with. This is the crowd, right? Like that's always been his yardstick. So
the entire 1996 Boyhood Dream run by Shawn Michaels hated. He was miserable because he was not the clean-cut babyface that they were making him out to be. He wanted to be edgier, but Vince wouldn't let them. So coming into Survivor Series 96, Shawn's actually booed. He loses the belt to Psycho Sid. He comes back in January of 97, Royal Rumble. He wins his title back, thus setting up Bret versus Shawn #2 at WrestleMania 13. The plan is outlined. Bret's going to go over. He walks up to Shawn, says, "I'm really looking forward to working with you. Thank you for doing me the honors. And we're going to keep this thing going." And Shawn said, "I'm not doing it."
I'm not going to put you over. I'm not putting you over, right? Yeah.
The next week, I think it was February of 1997 at the Lowell Memorial Auditorium. I was there.
Lowell, Massachusetts. I'm really glad you brought this up. I'm so proud of you for this.
I was there. Shawn Michaels walks out and says,
"You were there." I was, honestly, I hate to keep interrupting you, but I was thinking about this. I was thinking about this podcast today, and I said, I wonder if Mike is going to bring up Lowell. And I wasn't even in the United States by this point. I was still living in Ireland, which could explain why I'm a Bret Hart fan. As you said, all the international fans loved him. But I was still living in Dublin at the time. And I was thinking, I wonder if Ray and Craig and Mike were in Lowell for that match. I wonder if any of them were there. And it turns out you were there. That's amazing.
Yeah. I was
That's
there
unbelievable.
with my mom and my dad. And I remember Vince calling Shawn out. He has the belt, and Shawn says that, that he's lost his smile.
The lost his smile speech, so famous.
And he was crying. And I was 8. I was bawling my eyes. That is my guy relinquishing the title because he wanted to go home and find his smile. Little did I know that the backstage thing was, yes, he was hurt. Shawn will say that he had a very bad knee injury, that he was never cleared to wrestle again. Some of it is true, some of it isn't. The real thing, though, is that he didn't want to do the honors to Bret, which then set up a Taker versus.
Kind of mad you brought this up because this is going to be my big linchpin argument for when you eventually brought up that Bret didn't want to relinquish the title back to Shawn. And you'll remember he said in the "I Miss My Smile" speech that I watched today in prep for this show. I've lost my smile speech. He said in that, and it didn't look like Vince saw this coming at all. And he says he didn't see it coming, and I believe him. One of the very few things that comes out of Vince McMahon's mouth that I do believe. He lost his smile, all this stuff. He said, I may never wrestle again, like you just said, because he was saying I need a knee replacement.
Yep.
But then magically after this, he got a second opinion and he was cleared to fight in 4 weeks.
Well, kind of. So that was in February. He came back in May, but in 4 weeks, he did a backflip off the top rope and landed and started dancing around pretty much right in Bret's face, saying like, I'm not really hurt, right? Like, I just didn't want to do it. That set up Psycho Sid versus Taker for the belt. Taker wins, obviously, but the real story of this this Mania was the thing that Bret did to propel Stone Cold Steve Austin to the stratosphere of professional wrestling. It was a I Quit match refereed by Ken Shamrock, who was the biggest name in the UFC at this point in time.
They didn't even know what they were going to do with him.
No.
They were like, oh, we got him signed up. I mean, I guess make him a ref. You know what I mean? Like,
they were trying to legitimize this match and make it feel as real as possible. And I think it worked. What do you think?
Yeah, totally. And the beginning of the kind of, and, as you know, and like, I'm a big UFC MMA guy, and we haven't had an opportunity to do a ton of UFC preview stuff, but this is the beginning of the crossover, kind of in the meta crossover, the ideological crossover between the UFC and the WWE. And long before you young kids at home listening, long before Ronda Rousey makes that transition, Ken Shamrock goes over there. They had just no idea what to do with this guy. And which is what I think you guys were saying, what everybody was saying when Ronda went over there, which is, I think it's going to be a Ken Shamrock situation. It's like it's a different sport. It's a different set of skills. And yeah, Ken was a square peg in a round hole over there. But I love that he's the referee.
I think that was the point where John McCain was still calling it like human cockfighting and stuff like that.
Yeah. No, I mean, the UFC was in its infancy, but it and you say it legitimizes it. I think the WWE letting a UFC guy in legitimizes the UFC a lot. And it helps a lot of fans cross over at this point. And Ken Shamrock being at that match, it's a lucky right place, right time for him and for the whole thing, because what an insane finish. That sharpshooter finish. I'll let you keep going on it. But yeah, I just wanted to interject that Ken Shamrock stuff. It's so wild to me when you see his face popping up in the WWF.
A little backstory to this is that this is still 1997, right? So this is still PG WWF.
Right.
So there's not Attitude Era. They were told, Bret and Steve were told, there's no color, meaning no blood. Bret said, this match needs blood. Austin did not want to do it himself. So what Bret did, I don't know.
Austin wouldn't jig himself, right? Like he wouldn't blade himself.
Not at this point. He was pretty uncomfortable with it.
Right. And the WWF claims that they were in business for themselves that night on this blood, right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't make sense to me, because if the plot was that he was supposed to pass out from blood loss,
that wasn't.
It wasn't.
No,
okay.
he was supposed to never give up, like, and not tap out to make him look like a badass. But what happened was, Bret said, like, this match needs color, and there are numerous reports. I don't know which one's true, that he either hid a razor blade in his gums, in his wrist tape, or in his boots, and he knew the perfect moment to do it. And that gave us probably the most iconic moment in wrestling history, is when Austin puts both hands down, reaches up, and the blood just drips down his face, and then he's out cold, and Bret Hart is deemed the winner. So what do you take? I mean, Ray, DK, like, what are your takeaways from this match?
even though it says it in WrestleMania 14, like, oh, like it's the Austin era, Stone Cold. It wasn't really 14. It really was 13 that really dawned the Austin era. And like I said, we could thank Bret Hart because obviously, with Stone Cold, his iconic moment really was the year before the King of the Ring, when, he goes over against Jake Roberts, and then he comes up there with Michael Hayes from the Fabulous Freebirds. He's like, talk about your Psalms and you thump your Bibles, and you say your prayers or whatever, but Austin 3:16 says, I just whipped your ass. And, it just kind of just goes, that kind of catapults him from there. And thank God he got rid of that theme music, my God. But that's awful. No, that match with Bret Hart, it just showed that Bret Hart really was intelligent about the business. I know we kind of talked about before getting on here about not having the business savvy aspect of it all the way down, but just from the wrestling IQ, so to speak, I'm not sure more people had more of a wrestling IQ than Bret Hart. To know that match needed blood, to know that Austin was a good worker, and know that Austin could be someone that drew money. Now, I don't know if he envisioned if Austin would what he became later on that year, and then what he became in '98, and so on and so forth. But to have that foresight to say, you know what, I can work with this guy. This guy's a hell of a worker. Let's do it like this, was phenomenal thinking on Bret Hart's part. And, as a wrestling fan, I say thank you, because it catapulted us into one of the greatest eras, if not the greatest era in wrestling history.
And like what I'll say, DK, before you give your thoughts on this match, because we do want to get to the screw job here, is Austin never beat Bret. But that doesn't matter. Bret made Austin look like $1 million both times, different ways. The loser of that match is the most notable takeaway from that match. That's what you remember. You don't remember Bret winning from the sharpshooter. You remember Austin struggling to fight out of it with the blood dripping down his face. That's how good Bret was.
Yeah, it was a great handoff. It was an honorable thing for Bret to do to elevate him to that point. It's the best double turn in the history of the WWF.
Yep.
It launches Stone Cold Steve Austin. Without this match and without Bret Hart's know-how and elbow grease and ability to fight a fight, to wrestle a match that is not in his wheelhouse, you would think on paper. This is not the kind of match you would put Bret Hart in, but you wouldn't know it by looking at the tape. He goes in there and puts on such a display, such a selfless display for Stone Cold Steve Austin, and creates this iconic moment, just completely takes himself out of it. Like a lot of the criticism that we'll get into about the screw job, and I know we have to get there soon, is a lot of the criticism from the anti-Bret Hart camp is about his ego. Bret thought he was bigger than this. Shawn Michaels is on record saying Bret Hart thought he was too big for the company, all this stuff. That is not a guy to me with an ego. Bret Hart went in there and elevated Stone Cold Steve Austin because, as you said, he saw something in him. He knew he was good for the company, and he knew the kind of profile and storyteller.
Conversely, I would say that he never put him over. So Bret was a mark for Bret.
Sure, but I think that I think that's a good point. But he did end up winning the match. But I think he was, as you guys both just said, he knew what he was doing. He knew that he was elevating Stone Cold that night, and I think that's important. And it's one of the bloodiest matches of all time, which is not something you really think of immediately. Bret Hart in bloody matches, prior you think Ric Flair, was one of the, and like Bret Hart's been on record criticizing the Ric Flair's overblading on what was it that he said? He said he's unsubtle with Ric Flair's unsubtle with his blading, and he is. I mean, let's be honest, and it's one of the most subtle blades ever. And I know you're not supposed to say blading, and I know that there's all this, and it's a cliche to say all this stuff about what Bret did, but signature 4-figure leg lock in that match from Bret. Like, he does all the stuff that you expect Bret Hart to do, but it's a Stone Cold match. That's a Stone Cold Steve Austin match, and it's sure, it's in both of their top 5 of all time, but it's more prominent in a Hall of Fame match for Stone Cold.
I will say though, the knock on Bret from me and from a lot of people that are in the Shawn camp is that Bret thought wins and losses mattered in wrestling. They don't. It is It is a work.
But you're saying, okay, now we're going to argue. So we're finally here. You're saying that Bret thought that wins and losses mattered in wrestling, and they don't.
For him,
I agree that they don't matter. I do agree that they don't matter. But your evidence to that is that he wouldn't put Shawn over. And the reason he wouldn't put Shawn over is because Shawn said he wouldn't put him over first.
Or Austin.
Well, but that's a dip where we just talked about how good it was.
Well, but he didn't do it. And I mean, his most notable WrestleMania loss was to his brother, and it was a roll-up. His most notable SummerSlam loss was to his brother-in-law, and it was a roll-up. In the first 5 years of Bret's career, Bret was bordering on being a guy known for putting people over. And if you're early in your you're a tag team, that's what you're supposed to do. Like wins and losses actually don't matter.
Okay, fine. But what if let me just sit up in my chair here because now we're doing this. We're having a nice chat. Now we're doing this. If you're early in your wrestling career, you don't want to get that reputation. If you go on a solo run, especially, you don't want to get that reputation as somebody who puts people over too much. Bret did that a lot early in his career, even during his solo runs. Okay, he gave up the belt a few times. He put people over. He did everything he was supposed to do. He's an undeniably good company man. Even when he doesn't put Stone Cold over, as we just talked about at length, he elevates Stone Cold. He offers to put Shawn Michaels over and says, I'll do it, whatever needs to be done. And he walks up to him in the locker room. He says, I'll do whatever needs to be done. Like, just so you know, I'm a professional. You can count on me. This is verified from both guys. And Shawn Michaels says, that's great. I appreciate it. But just so you know, I'm not going to do the same for you. And that's what leads Bret to say, okay, well, then I'm never going to put him over. You know, I'm just not going to do it.
But also at that time, neither of them had creative control. So like they can say whatever they want. The man writing the script was not in the room.
Sure. But at the end of Bret's career, he had creative control, which leads reasonable, as they always say, reasonable creative control at the end of his career in the WWE before he goes to the Turner, you know, that the
WCW.
Promotion that shall not be named, you know, and he's you know, and I think he knew too. And I will say this: if you're going to criticize Bret, you know, he didn't fit in at WCW at all. You know, he didn't work at all, and they didn't use him right. And
said, not to cut you off, WCW does not know what to do with Bret the Hitman Hart.
No, they absolutely don't. They didn't know what to do with the character. Yeah, he was totally right. But he also was a loyal guy. He wanted to stick around in the WWF, and the picture that Vince McMahon painted him. And I'll get back to the other thing in a second. The picture that Vince McMahon painted him would have been undeniably what's the word I'm looking for? Like, just you would have been greedy for that. Any career would have been greedy for that. Like, I'm going to be the Babe Ruth of this organization. Like Vince painted that picture. He didn't ask him to. But to get back to your point, not putting people over. He's a second generation.
No. I didn't say not putting people over. I said because he made people bigger stars, but right. he never lost to them. You know what I mean? Like
that's genius. That's
great. When he was a man of that's a good thing for a heel. Like Ric Flair made baby faces, but never lost to them as a champion.
They made him be a heel at the end. It ruined him.
Except in Canada. I mean,
he can't be a heel in Canada. Well, the reason they made him a heel, as we all know, I mean, we're beating a dead horse here, but the reason that he became a heel is because he turned around to the entire American audience and said, "You guys suck."
Yep.
But and he's never coming back from that. But that was Vince's idea.
Conventional wisdom would dictate that a baby face doesn't make the heel look better by beating them. The heel makes the baby face look better by beating them.
A great baby face makes a great heel, and a great heel makes a great baby face. One needs the other. One hand washes the other. We all know this. The point is, Bret knew he was never going to be a good heel, and he tried. He tried to say
he was a fantastic heel.
I mean, he was. You think Bret was a good heel?
Yeah, I think so. I think Bret was mediocre at best on the microphone before 1997. But when they took off the handcuffs and because
he meant it,
and they brought back like the Hart Foundation, it was like, you know what, America like is so far below Canada. I'm not even going to waste my that. That's what you're supposed to do. People were paying to see him get his ass kicked, and it didn't happen.
I don't remember it like that at all. I mean, I feel like that was completely antithetical. I mean, it might be because I'm a Bret Hart homer, but it might be. But I think that was completely antithetical to his message, to the kind of guy he was. It didn't feel authentic to me. It didn't match up with the criticisms he had of Shawn Michaels in the first place, like his legitimate criticisms, not his works, when he was saying he's doing vulgar stuff in the ring, and why are they cheering for heels now? Like, wrestling's changing, like all these comments he was making.
When you think about it, it was perfect because Bret's character didn't change. He painted the picture on the microphone that they abandoned him, and all he ever did was
Bret's character didn't change, though. Bret's character didn't change. His character got sold out. The Hitman Hart got sold out by Vince McMahon because
I think it's one of the only times.
I don't know what to do with you. It was lazy. I don't know what to do with you. I guess we'll turn you heel.
I think it's one of the only times in the wrestling business where a babyface turns heel without doing anything drastically different, and it did work because he was going against Austin from pretty much March or April until July, which was the Canadian Stampede pay-per-view, which was in obviously Calgary, Alberta, Canada.
Okay, do the screw job, and then we'll get into this because we have to frame it with the screw job backstory. So do the screw job.
When you say the screw job, should we just get to it?
Yeah, we should just get to it because now we're talking about what happened. Okay, because we can go. I want to go back and reference this stuff in my arguments for the screw job. So let's just frame it, I think.
Okay, well. Now, without further ado, let's just get to the Montreal Screwjob. So, the summer of '97 was filled with awful promos by both Bret and Shawn to each other that they both said that they would never do. They both did it. There was backstage fights that happened, which brings us to, I believe it was September of 1997, where Vince McMahon tells Bret, "Hey, listen, I don't know if I'm going to be able to pay you what I told you I was going to be able to pay you because we're going to go bankrupt. Turner is kicking our ass." In September of 1996, it started an 82-week string of consecutive ratings defeats by WCW Monday Nitro to WWF Raw.
And this was a lie. Just, I mean, we know this now, right?
Well, hold on. No,
it wasn't a lie.
It wasn't then.
WCW was really killing them. And like I said,
they were losing in the ratings, but the reason that Vince McMahon wanted to get rid of Bret Hart's contract, you guys know this. I can see it in your faces.
No.
The reason he wanted to get rid of his contract is because he was planning on going public with the WWF at the time.
No, that didn't happen for another 2 years.
For another 2 years, but they told him that he should get rid of all his long-term obligations in order to go public to make him more appetizing to investors.
But in 1997, WWF was not profitable.
It was in 1998 is when they went public, right? So they went public a year later. Was it 99? So 2 years later, they went public, right? He's saying we don't have the money to back you. I don't buy that. I just do not buy that from Vince McMahon.
Well, when you think about, hold on, but in 1997, WWE generated, I think it was like $134 million in revenue. They had $120 million in pay. So they did not make any money. They made like $14 million as a company. In 1998, 1999, they made $530 million.
Yeah, their revenue was down, but that doesn't mean that they weren't in the red.
Well, it was they didn't have any stakeholders. It was just Vince. He did not. There was that was a family-run company at that point.
Sure, but he knew he knew his plan was to. First of all, I think he was mad that he got backed into a corner by Bret with the WCW contract. So it was a matter of principle
that he helped negotiate.
Yeah, but second of all, nobody put a gun to Vince McMahon's head to go and offer him that ludicrous contract. That contract would be ludicrous now. That contract would be ludicrous in any sport. 20 years, creative control, like lower workload. That was part of it, right? Like 190 days or something. Yeah, 185 days or whatever it was. He gave him the whole farm, and he was mad about it, and that's not Bret's fault. Like he couldn't honor his contract. I don't get like if that's now. This is 1997, right? If that's now in any sport, in the WWF, whatever, in the Twitter era, every single person is going on Twitter going, "Sorry, Vince, don't give a shit. You're the one who signed you." And he went out of his way to give Bret that contract.
I think that's because, I think that contract was a byproduct of Vince being screwed by the talent that he had created in WWF before.
Well, he didn't want to lose another star.
Right. So he wanted to lock it up. But you do need to realize 1997, 95, 96, 97 were some of the worst years in the WWF's history. Ratings were down. Live attendance was down. Everything was down. It doesn't really get better until after the Screwjob. But before we get to that, Vince says, "I can't pay you what I want. I think I'm going to have to breach the contract." He helps Bret with conversations with Eric Bischoff and WCW, secure a 3-year deal for $9 million. The last part of Bret's agreement with WWE in his last 30 days is that he has creative control, meaning he does not have to do what he does not have, what does not want to do.
Oh, you left one thing out, by the way. When he offered Bret that 20-year contract, he said, and I quote, "I'll never give you a reason to ever want to leave."
Yep.
Right? I just want that on record. He said that right to Bret, and Bret Hart, up until this point, has not done anything shady. He's not gone against his word. He's been a complete straight shooter. He's been loyal to the company. Just want that established. Up until
and never hurt anyone in the ring. He's the only wrestler that I know of that never caused an injury. Technically
perfect. He's been a good company man. The only criticism you could maybe level at him is that he hasn't, the win-loss thing. Ray, do you agree? No, there's no blemish on his record.
He's a mark for himself.
He's definitely a big fan of himself. Like
but there's no real blemish on his record from a business perspective.
I mean, business-wise, no. I mean, like we already talked about it. I mean, his mic skills were below average, but other than that, no. But from a technical standpoint, everything else, no.
His mic skills might have been below average, but his showmanship was good.
Yeah, I mean, but like you said, Dave, like until he got pissed off and like I said, they took off the handcuffs. Like like I said, that promo that he cut when he was like, "Everyone's turning a blind eye, Vince, you're turning a blind eye." Like that was great because they let him be him, and like I said, he was pissed off because of
he felt it, he meant it.
That's not why I loved Bret though. For me,
right. But I'm saying, I'm saying like part of the character, and this is with any wrestler, like part of the character is how you deliver things on the mic, right? So
totally, yeah,
it's only. You can only go so far with your wrestling ability, right? Yeah. And I can argue there's no one that's gotten more out of his wrestling ability than Bret Hart, right? But you have to have both because you have to have something that.
And he was a lot better in promos when he had the sunglasses and the belt and the jacket, and he could be a little bit quieter. And that was kind of his image. And when he had to do it in the ring, I do agree that he, without any of that stuff on, and that is where it counts. Obviously, like anybody can cut a promo, you get 20 takes on it. But when he had to do it live, I do agree that he was subpar for sure.
I think Bret always fell into the category of he was not someone who could talk you into the building. But if you were talked into the building, you saw him wrestle, you'd come back again to see him wrestle.
Well, he wasn't the advertisement; he was the product.
Yeah. But Shawn could talk you in, and
he was. I agree.
And he was a great worker. So. The stage has been set. Bret has creative control. The event is Survivor Series. It's going to be in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. The World Wrestling
chills. We're here.
The World Wrestling Federation Championship match will be between Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart. 18 months in the making. I mean, this story. They literally didn't have to do any promos before. They did, but they shouldn't have because the story told itself. Right? We all wanted to see this match, and leading up to it. Vince said to Bret, "We're going to have Shawn go over." And Bret said, "No, that's not, I'm not going to lose to Shawn. And first of all, I'm not going to lose to Shawn. Number one. Number two, I don't want to drop the belt.
I don't think that was number one. I hate to quibble with you, but number one was I don't want to lose in Canada.
Which again, it's a scripted sports entertainment product. So like, again, he cares about the wrong things when it's him. He's a mark for himself. Number one. So I don't want to lose in Canada. I don't want to lose to Shawn. Vince said, "Okay, well, what if we get the belt off you before?" He said, "No, because I've been advertised as the champion in Canada.
As the champion in the pay-per-view, which is fair."
So basically, fair. Vince gives all these different options to Bret and to Shawn. None of them are being easy. None of them are agreeing with each other. And ultimately, Bret suggested, "Well, why don't we just do like a schmoz finish? I'll drop the belt, or I'll just walk into Raw in Ottawa the next day and give you the belt."
No. It wasn't in Ottawa. It was the next Monday Night Raw in the US that he said he would drop the belt. It was the following week, and he said it was the next Monday Night Raw, and it was, I think, in Madison Square Garden, and Vince didn't want to pay the $40,000 to tape it or whatever it was.
So not the Raw after Survivor Series, but the Raw after the Raw after Survivor Series.
I think so. I could be wrong about this. And then we agreed beforehand not to sit here and Google stuff, but I think it was, he agreed to do it because he was, now you might be right that he was making that up and he just didn't want to lose it to Shawn, but I think he said, I'll do it at the next American date.
Not to Shawn though.
No, it was like to the, what was that guy's name? Bronx Bomber, the Brooklyn Brawler. What was that?
No. He was kidding. Okay, so I know what you're talking about. He said he would much rather lose to the Brooklyn Brawler in Madison Square
Garden. Right, but
it was
his. But he said he'd go in and drop the belt on that night, just like Shawn had done with his fake knee injury.
Just so you know, the Brooklyn Brawler was a mid card, or not
right? Exactly. Yeah.
He was.
So you're right. You're right, but he did say that he would go in and drop it the same way Shawn dropped it with his semi-fake knee injury,
yep.
right? And
but the problem is here, Shawn wasn't leaving for the competitor. Bret was.
He didn't want to leave for the competitor. But he tried everything to not leave for the competitor.
But he was. He was, and he was leaving. And as we did touch upon a couple, minutes ago, the WWF at that time had already seen their champion of a division walk over to WCW and drop a belt in the trash. First of all, let me just tell you this: I don't think Bret would have done it. I don't think Bret.
He absolutely wouldn't have. He absolutely wouldn't have. And I'll tell you something else: the WCW was in no position to do that again. They were balls deep in litigation over the characters that you had already just mentioned. Diesel and Razor that had left. That the WWF was suing them over stealing those likenesses.
The WWF lost that lawsuit, by the way.
But at the time, they're knee deep in this stuff, and it's they're like what was the guy's name that Brent did all the deals with? That I never did any of the WCW. I never watched any of it. What was the head of the
Eric Bischoff?
Eric Bischoff was saying he absolutely wouldn't have done that again. He was in no legal position to do that. That was Vince's paranoia, because Vince thinks that everyone else is as much of a piece of shit as Vince is.
Well, hold on. A couple of things. When Eric Bischoff came over to WWE, he did an interview and said, "I understand why Vince would think that. I can tell you it never crossed my mind. I don't know if you believe me."
Yeah, he understands why Vince would think that, because he understands how Vince thinks, and Vince is paranoid that everyone sucks as much as Vince does.
There's no finish here in this match, right? So there's a meeting at a hotel room with Vince McMahon.
Wait, we left out, by the way, just a quick interesting aside, when Bret Hart legitimately beat the shit out of Shawn Michaels. The night
you mean before the match?
Before the match, when he
it's been heavily disputed.
I think the case was that everybody was pretty aware that if they really did ever fight,
Bret would kick it. Yeah,
that Bret would win, and and he went. But anyway, the famous thing that nobody disputes. Jim Cornette, who we all love, I would hope, right? Jim Cornette is.
I hate him, but
love, hate, right? Love, hate, but you've laughed at things he said.
Oh yeah,
I would hope,
absolutely.
Right?
And a lot of memes.
And a lot of memes. Famously says. I'm paraphrasing here, but famously said, like, Bret came back and beat the brakes off him. Shawn Michaels couldn't whip cream in a dairy factory, but famously, hair got pulled out. Shawn Michaels lost a clump of hair, and Orton has the hair. I hear, still has the hair from that night. Yeah, that's the rumor on the street.
That'd be hysterical.
But there weren't that many people there. But then Shawn Michaels famously went into Vince's office and complained about a safe work environment. You got a crazy guy working here, whatever. So I just wanted to say that in lead up, it's the situation is not sports entertainment tense. The situation is life tense at this point. Yeah, like they went through a wall fighting each other. Like, yes, okay, cool, go on.
So this is all, the animosity is real. There was, I thought we could touch on this, but I'll just say, like, there were references made by Bret Hart to the way that Shawn conducted himself in the ring, that he appeared to be stripping with and bringing little boys into the ring to pose with him. Shawn then, and the next week on Ross,
outed him having an affair with Sunny Days.
Made the Sunny Days comment, which for those of you that don't know, Sunny was a valet in WWF at the time. She made her way around the locker room. It is there's no stories. She was actually involved with Shawn Michaels at the time. So Shawn made the comment just really to piss Bret off, cause tension,
and it worked because he went home and his wife was like, "WTF, mate?"
Yeah, right. So now it's the night before. Okay, and we're going to try and go through this as fast as possible. It's Vince, Shawn, Triple H, and Joe Briscoe in a room talking about how this match is going to go. And Vince literally says, I don't know what's going to happen. Like I can't let him leave with the belt. And Shawn famously said, like, what are we talking about here? And Triple H said, and I quote, fuck him. If he won't do business for him.
That's a funny thing to hear from Mr. Curtain Call, by the way. I just to pop out here. I mean, to have Triple H do what I think is one of the worst displays of professionalism in the history of sports entertainment, coming out with that curtain call bullshit. He was still getting punished at the time for this, by the way.
Oh, he was being buried, yeah.
And the only reason that he got back in, we all know this. I mean, we're getting into high school gossip here, but the only reason he got back into Vince's good graces is because he's married his damn daughter.
Well, that was in 2003.
So, yeah, but I mean, they were already having an affair by this point, I think.
That was in 1999.
Okay, well, maybe they texted. I don't know, but I don't even think texting was a thing yet.
They were paging each other.
He was still having a few nights in China at this point. R.I.P.
Like, he was yes. Okay. Anyway, back to reality. Whoops! There goes gravity. Here's the thing: Triple H shouldn't have had a voice in that room. Okay, so. Maybe, and I don't even really think he should have a voice in rooms right now. But are you a Triple H guy, Mike?
Yeah, I mean,
you both are. Jesus, I'm in a hot room right here.
Well, he single-handedly rebuilt their entire developmental division and made it into a brand that actually draws money when it tours. I mean,
eventually, once he was given like his third and fourth chance. So
when he was champion, he was terrible. From 2003 2002 to 2006, it was called the it was the reign of terror, and it was bad. Yeah,
and the curtain call, and I know that wasn't his fault. And
that was Shawn's fault, and Triple H ate the shit for it.
Yeah, and he's the one who got punished because Shawn was the champion. He wasn't going to get punished. The guys that were on their way out couldn't get punished. So, Triple H ate the shit for it. But he went around and did a bunch of disingenuous apologies about it and whatever. I wouldn't co-sign a mortgage with Triple H. That's all I'm saying. I wouldn't trust him as far as I could throw him, which is not very far. So Triple H planted the bug, is what you're saying. He planted the bug in Vince McMahon's head about maybe we screw him over.
So at this point in time, like that was the call was okay, we'll do it, but we just don't know when. So now Shawn Michaels is put into the I would say the worst possible place to be in Montreal, Quebec, Canada, in the ring with a guy who can clearly beat you up. I mean, Shawn.
Oh yeah, they were worried he was going to actually get his ass kicked that night. Yeah.
So Gerald Briscoe, who was an old school wrestler and promoter and helper with the WWF at the time, was showing Shawn moves about how to shoot wrestle, just in case he was put into a spot where he couldn't get out. So Shawn has famously said, like, it's one thing to be the person that says this is going to happen. It's a whole nother thing to be the guy that has to go out there and do it, right? And so before the match, Bret and Shawn meet, and Bret actually said, I really hope that, this is a great match. I do want to say, like, above all else, I really enjoy working with you. I'm sorry that it got as bad as it did. And they actually had a great conversation, and they actually patched it up.
Which is why the famous footage in Wrestling with Shadows, Bret's like, come on, man. And Shawn's like, absolutely not, which we now know is a lie. But he's like, absolutely not. And Bret's like, I don't believe you, but like, whatever. We had this talk beforehand, whatever. I'm going to go take a shower. But yeah, it's nice. And that could have been the moment that they finally patched it up if it wasn't for Vince McMahon, but whatever.
They had this come to Jesus moment, and then they went over the match, and they said, okay, well, about 13 minutes into the match, what's going to happen is Shawn's going to lock me up into the sharpshooter. The referee's going to take a bump. DX is going to run down. Then the Hart Foundation is going to run down. It's going to be a double DQ. That was the time in Shawn's head where he said, that's where we do it. That's where we have the turn happen. That's where we have the bell ring.
Nobody knew. Nobody knew what was going to happen. Like the guys in the gorilla position didn't know, the guys who were supposed to be doing the cue, for those at home, the guys sitting behind the curtain, cueing the surprise wrestlers to come into the gorilla position, that those guys didn't know. The truck didn't know. Or I think maybe one guy in the truck maybe knew.
Kevin Dunn knew.
Kevin, Kevin, he knew.
By the way, he's the worst possible human being in the history of the wrestling business. But that's
a whole other podcast.
Okay, so Earl Hebner is a referee. Earl Hebner is probably the most famous referee in WWF history or wrestling history because of this. And he's pulled he's pulled aside by, I believe it was Vince or someone in Gorilla saying, when Shawn locks it in, call for the bell. So that's it.
But Bret had gone to him prior.
Yeah, so Bret
and
goes
said, "You're not going to screw me, right? Like, we're good."
I swear I wouldn't do it. I love you, Bret. I wouldn't do it, buddy. I promise I wouldn't do it. I'm not going to do it. Then you come out there, and he hops out the ring. And I mean, and listen, I have to give my take on this. We talked about this beforehand, and like I said, we talked about how Scott Hall felt, some others have felt. I still can't for the life of me understand, how do you let him put him in your own finishing move, Bret? How do you let that happen? You can't let that happen. Not in your hometown. Not when they know you're on the way out. Like, come on, man.
I have two arguments for this, and I think it's the linchpin of my argument because what you're saying is what everyone's been saying to Bret for the last 30 years. How could you not have known? How could you not have known what they were going to do? This is why people think it was a
especially if you suspected it.
Yeah, if you suspected it, because he did suspect it, because he put a wire on himself and went in to talk to Vince beforehand to get it all on tape. If he thought it was a work, or the people that think it was a work think it has to be a work for that reason, because Bret had to have known. He's not an idiot. He's a little bit of an idiot about some stuff, but he's not an idiot about this stuff, right? Like, he had to know. Two reasons. I'll tell you the two reasons. Number one, and this is like not from the internet. This is a genuine DK Sizzle hot take. Not the first one, but the second one. The first one is he was boys with the ref, and the ref said no. He swore on his kids. He swore on his kids that he was not going to call the fight against Bret. And Bret, the running theme of this is that Bret takes people at their word, and he shouldn't. Number two, and this is the most important one, and this is the thing I've noticed in all my research on the Montreal Screwjob today. The sharpshooter is not a pin. It's a submission. You have to tap to the sharpshooter. You have to go, I'm done. I am in pain. So there's no worry in Bret's head that it's up to him to lose to the sharpshooter.
Yeah, a couple of things played into Bret's favor, right? Like,
yeah, get me in the sharpshooter all you want. I'm not going to sit on and I'll say this, and this is the most annoying part about the Montreal Screwjob. Shawn Michaels fucks up the sharpshooter. He doesn't even do it right.
Yep, Bret had to correct him.
And Bret corrects him in the move.
Yep.
And as he's doing a nice thing, correcting him, ding, ding, ding.
So Bret was lulled into a.
He didn't give up. It's not even a real screw job. He didn't give up. They rang the bell. The referee said, "Yeah, but it's not even a real." He didn't even really win the match. I've never heard anyone say this. It's not a pin. His shoulders aren't on the ground. Right? For 3 seconds. He didn't give up.
The record books will look and say that Bret gave up.
He didn't, though. He didn't.
Shawn Michaels won the belt via
at the end of the day, Bret screwed Bret.
No. How are you going to let him? You asked the question. How are you going to let him? And I mean, listen, that was a great line, and it was a genius piece of PR. There's no beating Vince McMahon in public relations. Okay, and Bret Hart should have known that, but Bret Hart felt comfortable getting into his own submission because it wasn't a pin.
Because he knew he was going to tap. And he knew that the referee couldn't fast count it, right? He was lulled into a false sense of security for two different reasons. One, Pat Patterson helped him put the match together. And he asked Pat. Pat said no. Because they consciously did not tell Patterson what was going to happen. By the way, rest in peace to the first ever Intercontinental Champion, Pat Patterson. But he was a Bret guy. So they didn't tell him on purpose. And Earl Hebner was a Bret guy, and they told him right before he ran out to the ring. They basically threatened his job, right? So if you don't do this, you're out.
No, they did. They said they're going to fire him if he didn't do it, yeah.
So, by the way, like what gets lost in this entire discussion is that this match was really good. It was actually it was
the main event, the Screwjob match. It was 12 minutes.
Yeah, but the 12 minutes, it was a real fight. Like if you talk about like the angst and the tension that they built in WrestleMania 12, go back and watch this one because it was legit. This it felt like a big fight. It looked like a real fight. Don't watch the end. You already know what happens.
And even in like, once again, I'm big of crowd reaction, right? I'm not sure because I've been to a couple of WrestleManias. I've been to some other pay-per-views. I'm not sure there's ever been more animosity in one building than that night. Like, ever. It didn't matter. It didn't matter whether
the crowd was in the know. They knew what had happened. There was a section of
well,
the crowd.
they wanted Shawn to get his ass beat though.
I thought they were going to beat Shawn's ass.
He wiped his ass with the Canadian flag.
Which I'm surprised no one brought that up to now. I mean, when I watched it, I'm like, yo, like
a beautiful heel move, by the way.
Yeah, phenomenal. Yeah. But I'm like, wow,
he's a great heel.
I'm like, you wiped the Canadian flag. I said in between your legs, and I'm like, wow, and he's sneezing on it, and I'm just like, wow, like. I mean, I thought the Un-American run in 2002 was crazy with Lance Storm and Christian. But I mean, oh my God, that doesn't pale in comparison to what Shawn Michaels did that night coming out to the ring. And I mean, if the crowd could have literally jumped over the gate and just held him in between the rings and just let Bret just deal on him, then they would have, because there was not a person in that building looking for Shawn Michaels to be victorious that night at all. Like it's unbelievable. And I miss those type of crowds in wrestling. Like we'll never get that back. And if anything, that's more criminal than the actual screw job, because when those crowds are on fire like that, there's nothing like it, man.
Damn, I just like a crowd at this point. Forget a kind of crowd, just a crowd would be great.
So, I mean, what I guess everyone knows what happens at the end. Like Vince says, "Ring the fucking bell," right? Earl Hebner rings it. They all.
And there was some sort of, and this is just popped into from my subconscious. There was some sort of reason Vince was standing next to the ring that he made up, right? Or am I just making that up? Like, why was Vince right next to the ring? That was unusual.
So I think this is where I think if you're Bret, you have to know some shit's about to go down, right?
Why is he down there?
So why are you even down there? You're not doing commentary anymore. Now
for the first time.
You know, so now you're the the Mr. McMahon character starting to kind of come about then, really. And that's where it really began. So
you think he had this in his head already?
Absolutely. And that's what I'm saying. Like, I feel like that's why I'm saying like it was like that's why I think it was a work. I'm just like, yo, like if you're down there and he's by the sideline, he's not getting to get a ringside seat. He owns the shit. He can sit wherever he wants to sit. And and we all know Vince's control freak nature. He sits in Gorilla and he sits there and he mans the whole show. Like that's just what he does. So for him to be down there by ringside, he had to know, okay, this is going to get ugly. Or Hebner knew it was going to get ugly. That's why he bolted out of the ring and he ran out of the building that fast. Mick Foley was pissed off and basically took his ball.
Taker's the biggest takeaway because in the hallway afterwards. And this is why I love Taker forever. And I know we're all we're recording this like a week after he's kind of officially retired. I mean, and we're all in an emotional Taker kind of moment. But I was doing my Montreal Screwjob due diligence today, and the moment you hear that Taker's storming down the hallway has very little to do with this whole thing, and is storming down the hallway to go find Vince McMahon to go, you better go talk to that guy because he's one of the boys. Like Taker's always one of the boys, and why he's the GOAT, really. Like I mean, he's not my favorite of all time, but he's number 2 for sure. Because Bret. But
well, yeah, I mean, everyone respects Taker, and then everyone respects,
can't hate him.
You respect his opinion. So, and I mean, to be honest, he ran that locker room for years. So
100%.
Whatever he said, essentially really went. Not Triple H, not Shawn Michaels, not Steve Austin. No, but people really think that because of his family ties, so to speak. So,
right.
But that was not the case. So, there was so much backlash from that, and everyone wanted answers. Everyone wanted to know what the hell was going on. And but to Vince's credit, he comes back there. He's like, all right, I'll let him knock me out, and they're in the shower. They're in the Bret's in the shower.
Bret says, if you're still
here, I'm gonna knock him out. And he's like, then he says on there, he's like, I can't believe I'm gonna hit this man in the face, and he knocks him out, and the rest was history. And they move on from there. But I mean, granted, it sucks that it even had to happen because, like I said, obviously he should have still been that Babe Ruth. He should have been that guy. He should have been here forever. He should have been in the John Cena category. He should have been in the Steve Austin category. But he ended up going to WCW, and it was just like, yo, like this is awful because he's one of the best that we've ever seen, and it's a sour ending for everybody because of how you're putting this on live TV. So it was just bad all the way around, man.
I'm just curious about why did Bret screw Bret? I just don't.
I mean, but you said it already. Like, Vince is just a master, public relationship person. But and additionally, why I could say this, still say this will work. There's no way, and like Scott Hall said this as well. There's no way Vince at that time, especially when they're losing to WCW, and you see Bret go WCW on his pay-per-view.
They cut the mics
on his pay-per-view. Like, there's no way.
Everybody knew that he was going to the WCW.
There's no way that he would allow that to happen. So
he was at that point. He was just trying everything because he was emotional and he just gotten screwed over. And he's breaking apart the TV sets. I mean, that was all real.
And that wasn't on TV.
And
there's footage of it though.
Right, it's footage. Yeah, but like you spit on Vince, which I mean, now see, and listen, say what you want about Vince and say what you want about how that went down. And we saw this in the 05 Royal Rumble when he blew his quads running into the ring because he was mad about the finish. Yep. If you would spit on me,
was so embarrassing.
It was hilarious though. But
honestly, I would rather die than have somebody spit in my face.
Right, but I would have came into the ring at that moment, and I'm sorry. At that moment, I'm forget that I'm the boss. Forget that I'm Mr. McMahon. I'm Mr. Kennedy McMahon. Damn it! Well, I'm coming in the ring, and we're just gonna go at it. Like, if I lose, I lose. But we're throwing hands at that moment.
There's nothing you can do at that point. And I will say, what an insane. At that point, you have Bret Hart, multi-time champion, second generation wrestler. He's got all these accolades. Little did we know, he's one of the most accurate spitters I've ever seen in my entire life. That was like a sniper rifle.
It was a bullseye.
I couldn't believe it. Especially when we've all been in different athletic situations. And your saliva is unpredictable when you're trying to spit on the court or on the field. But damn, dude, that was like a laser beam. He bought all the upgrades in spitting that night. That was crazy.
So a little bit of the aftermath here, because I want to get back to our last point. Shawn Michaels breaks his back in a casket match a little over 2 months after this match against Undertaker in 1998. He can only wrestle one more match in the next 5 years. Let's see. Bret debuts on WCW Nitro the next night after Survivor Series, but is instantly mishandled. He then sustains a career-ending concussion at the hands of Bill Goldberg in 1999 with a untelegraphed kick to the face.
Mule kick.
Yeah, it was awful. Yeah. WWF goes on to overtake WCW in the ratings war. After losing for 82 straight weeks, WCW was purchased by WWF in 2001. And after Shawn Michaels is on his way to recovery, he obviously, for those of you that are listening to this, know that he is a born-again Christian. He admits that in May of 2002 on an episode of WWE Confidential that he was in on the Screwjob, but he was ordered not to disclose that information, and that was the burden that really just kind of keeps him up at night. He then, 4 months later, goes on to return to WWE after a 4-year absence and 2 back surgeries. He was never medically cleared to return, but wrestled for another 8 years. Bret suffers a stroke due to symptoms of the concussion that he sustained at the hands of Goldberg.
No, it was a bike accident.
Hold on, he fell off his bike, but the doctors did say that the concussion that he sustained was never was never treated the way it should have been treated.
Oh, gotcha.
He receives a call in the ICU from none other than Vince McMahon saying, like, Bret, you're gonna come back from this. We're gonna figure this out. Everything's gonna be okay. Like, you just have to get back to being you. And Bret went on to say, I know that you did your research, DK, that call was very inspiring to him.
Yeah, because Bret Hart is the kind of guy that doesn't want real conflict with the people that he cares about.
He also wants to be loved.
Yeah, I mean, you can frame it that way, but he made an effort multiple times, as we discussed on the show, with Shawn Michaels to bury the hatchet, and Shawn wouldn't do it because Shawn was obsessed with Shawn. Shawn thought he should be number one, and didn't matter in what capacity Bret was there. If Bret was ever there, he couldn't be number one. And he wasn't wrong about that. Bret made an effort, even on the night of the screw job, to bury the hatchet with Shawn. Bret doesn't like to be in conflict with people. He's not a grudge holder. He's Canadian, for God's sake. He took Vince's apology with character and grace, like I would expect Bret Hart to. And Vince may not have said I'm sorry, but him reaching out was enough for Bret. And that's
so for you. What does it say to Vince's character that he did reach out to a guy that had not been under contract in 5 years, and he really didn't have any? He had no reason to do it.
He's such a strange guy, man. I mean, he's in one moment he'll be doing the worst thing you've ever seen, and then in another moment he's the most charitable dude in the world. I think that
he's an enigma.
He definitely is an enigma. I think that my best guess, and this is pure speculation about Vince McMahon, is that he does care about his guys, and he wouldn't be good at his job if he didn't. And he's been put in situations where, based on his values and his ethics, he's had to choose the business over the person a few times. Now, I don't think when it comes to the screw job, he did the right thing, but I think because of everything that made Vince McMahon up until that point, he did the right thing for him, from his perspective. He fell backed into a corner. He was paranoid about the belt going to the WCW. He didn't. If somebody had just been able to take him away from the situation and said to him, on what planet is Bret
all
Hart?
of them, really? All of them.
Yeah, all of them. I mean, they were all so close to the situation. And looking back, I just wish someone had been able to show Vince, on what planet is Bret Hart going to take your title and bring it to the WCW? He did everything he could to stay here. He said, Vince, give me a reason to stay. Please give me a reason to stay.
I am forever grateful that it happened, because if it does not happen, we don't get the Austin era.
I disagree.
We don't get the Rocky.
I disagree with this. Because if you look at how Bret's contract was structured, he would have had another. We missed out. To me, we missed out on another great match with Stone Cold, because their chemistry was off the charts. We missed out on Bret, like Mike said, finally putting Stone Cold over. We missed out on.
I don't know if that ever would have happened, but
I think it would have happened. What's your opinion on The Rock and Hulk Hogan? What's your opinion on that match?
I think at WrestleMania 18.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, well, I'm a little biased. Like I love The Rock.
I do too.
But once again,
as a wrestler, by the way,
yeah, right.
He's not fit to lace Arnold Schwarzenegger's boots when it comes to action stars. But as a wrestler, I love The Rock.
But no, I mean, WrestleMania 18, and like I said, we'll get into that. I kind of feel like this is going to be a start of a rivalry podcast, so I'm putting that plug out there. That Rock and Hogan at WrestleMania 18 in Toronto, that was at the Sky Dome. That was another crowd that was just super white hot. But I mean, I loved that match, and it was icon versus icon, and
it was super predictable though, right? Yeah. Because you knew that.
No, I mean, I didn't think, because once again, we talked about, you said that he made that mistake with Hogan before in the early 90s. Like, I wouldn't have been shocked if they had put Hogan over, even as a kid, if they had put Hogan over.
Either way,
The Rock at that time.
Either way, my point is that if they do what they were supposed to do with Bret, then you have a ready-made and installed guy that can do that stuff for the company. That as we saw he could do, that he did with Stone Cold, elevate these superstars based on his name, be the Babe Ruth of the company. Let him go and fulfill the role that he thought he could fulfill. And he doesn't stand in the way of the Attitude Era then. Because what you're saying is, if we don't have the screw job, and everyone seems to take this as gospel. If we don't have the screw job, then we don't have the Attitude Era. Why? Because Mr. McMahon
it propelled it. No, it propelled it.
Helped it, but it doesn't mean that we already agreed tonight that the reason that Stone Cold Steve Austin was so elevated was because of Bret Hart.
Yeah,
and
but
that match,
you
not
don't
because
have
of the
the
screw job.
evil Mr. McMahon character without the screw job.
I don't think that's as important. And I think that and Ray even Ray admitted that character was already in Vince's head. So he could have just made the character anyway.
Yeah, but how do you make a character if so the reason that the character took off so quickly and the WWE overcame WCW was because
he legitimately had to screw somebody.
He legitimately screwed somebody.
That's outside of the purview and the ethics and the values of sports entertainment, though.
But I'm gonna push back on you, Dave, because you made this statement earlier this show, and when it comes out, a heel needs a baby face. And that baby face needs to heal.
In the story,
McMahon being
not in real life. You don't.
Yeah, but it's not real life. It's scripted. It wasn't real life, but
well, what happened in real life propelled what was being scripted.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. But I'm saying like he becomes the heel. He becomes the heel, and then he becomes the boss that everyone hates, and people keep watching every week. That's what happened. That's exactly what happened.
That is what happened, but I don't think that means that they couldn't have done the Attitude Era in a similar way with similar characters, with Bret not getting screwed over. I think people take it as gospel that it took that screw job to make that happen. I just don't agree with that. All the factors were in place already. So Stone Cold was already there. Who's the face of the Attitude Era?
Stone Cold.
Who made Stone Cold, as we talked earlier? Bret Hart. We missed out on a great match. We missed out on the rematch of Stone Cold and Bret, man. Where Bret put.
I would implore you to go back and watch Survivor Series '96. Also, Bret didn't lose, but what I would say is
but we missed out on Bret losing to Stone Cold. That would have been his big loss. That would have been a loss that he could take in his heart. I know it.
The Attitude Era did not need the screw job to happen for the Attitude Era to take place, but because it happened, it took place sooner. What I'll also say is Bret was not a fan of where wrestling was going. Right, so he would have been a staunch rival to actually the product and where it was going. He did not like the creative direction. He didn't like all the
He loved Stone Cold's character though.
So yeah, but he liked it also. Like okay, this is another tangent. He liked Stone Cold. He liked The Rock. He had pretty good judge of character.
Okay, the only two people that matter in the Attitude Era. So who cares?
I would say The Undertaker and Degeneration X.
But the Undertaker was already The Undertaker, so he wouldn't have had an issue with Taker. Taker could have done whatever he wanted.
If Bret doesn't, if the screw job doesn't happen, there is no Austin. I mean, Austin and Michaels don't face off at Mania. There's no Mike Tyson in it. Mike Tyson isn't aligned with DX and then turns on DX at the end of the match to give Austin the belt. That moment when JR says in Boston, Massachusetts was not there, but was able to skip school the next day because my boy lost. The minute that Jim Ross says Stone Cold, like that was it. And it took Shawn.
But the assumption that it would have been worse is not a correct assumption. I think that the screw job,
not that worse. It just when I just don't think it may not have been at the height that we
would have been different.
It just would have been different. Doesn't mean it would have been awful. Doesn't mean worse. Yeah, no, I know. I agree. I'm just saying. I just feel like that's such a nostalgic moment that it's so hard to say. Well, you take that out of there.
But it's built on the back of an ethical dilemma. It's built on the back of a screw job.
Sure, but it was beautiful. And remember, Bret.
You didn't just no, but he didn't though, and you didn't just screw over anybody. You screwed over a guy who, from 1992, was the best company man that you had to offer. He bailed you out of your Lex Luger bullshit.
I would say from 1985, he was the best.
Sure. Great. I mean, he bailed you out of the steroid scandal. He bailed you out of your Lex Luger bullshit. He bailed you out of your Diesel bullshit. He bailed you out of Shawn Michaels being a loony on the road a little. He did everything he did everything that was ever asked of him except the last thing, and that's the brush we choose to paint him with.
Well, no, okay, well, that's the brush that we choose to paint him with because he has a history of really, really thinking that wins and losses matter when
his character, Bret the Hitman Hart,
can sustain a loss. It could.
No, it could sustain a loss, but Bret the Hitman Hart losing to it wasn't. You're making it broad. Bret the Hitman Hart shouldn't have lost to Shawn Michaels by that point. He should have been able to relinquish the belt. He's right when he says, I should have been able to relinquish the belt and leave. He deserved that. He earned it.
So A couple things that just to tie this up.
Shawn Michaels got to do it. Shit.
It's actually, well, that's another thing. So it's actually, so after Bret suffers the stroke, Vince calls him. They do a DVD. They do the Hall of Fame, but Bret is still nowhere to be seen on WWE television. It's actually WrestleMania 25, Shawn Michaels versus The Undertaker, which is regarded as probably the greatest match in WrestleMania history. Bret is on record of saying that he watched that match and he was so proud of Shawn and of Undertaker that made him want to come back to the WWE and fix things. So that we fast forward to January 4th, 2010. Bret the Hitman Hart is a special guest host on Monday Night Raw. The first thing he does is call out Shawn Michaels. And they did not speak to each other backstage. They made it a point to do that. They texted and said, we'll just do it in the ring. And they both buried the hatchet. It was over. So what was a 13-year saga at that point is now a 23-year saga at this point. Looking back on it, I'm going to say to you, I kind of know your answer, DK, so I want to save you for a second. Ray, who was at fault for the screw job?
I mean, I'm getting back to a corner, but I mean, I still have to say it was Bret, but only by default, not because it's because he was leaving the company. So because he was leaving, because there was something that already happened, you know, we talked about it. Vince felt that he was backed into a corner. Now, granted, could he have handled things differently? Sure. But just in that moment, who to me deserves the lion's share? Because he was on the way out, because he was someone that was a major part of the business, but, you know, couldn't just, you know, it was, as they said, the timed honored tradition that when you leave the business, you drop the belt on the way out. No ifs, ands, buts about it. That simple. You know, if you're the company guy, then that's what you do. So I have to put that on Bret. I hate that it had to happen to such a great guy, but like I said, we got one of the best evers out of that. So thank you, Bret. But I have to put it on the Hitman Hart. But you're still the best there is, the best there was, the best there ever will be.
DK, who's to blame?
He's not even in the top 5 of blame. It goes like this. It goes, Vince is number 1. Vince is probably also number 2. Triple H is number 3. Earl, the ref, is number 4 for lying to Bret. And then Vince again at number 5. So
I guess for you, like, what level of blame do you assign to Shawn Michaels in that moment?
There's no world in which I expect Shawn Michaels to react differently when he's presented with that blame. So if I know what I know about Shawn Michaels' character, about who he was as a person in real life, like that's like asking the sun
at that point. Shine.
So, you know, it's that is what it is. I'm not mad at Shawn because that, you know, that's just Hit Dog's gonna holler. So at the end of the day,
you give him any credit for actually going out there and doing it.
Give who any credit?
Shawn, because when you think about it,
because he should have been afraid for his fucking life.
yes, he should have been afraid for his life.
But Ray makes a good point, and it's a poignant point, and it's that, you know, it's tough to speculate what happened, what would have happened after. It's tough to speculate whose fault it was. Vince was backed into a corner. The thing that always sticks out to me is that if Vince had have given Bret Hart the benefit of the doubt, he wouldn't have screwed him over back. So Vince screwed Bret because he thought Bret might screw him, but I'm 100% sure that he wouldn't have. And so are you, Mike. So nobody had to get screwed in that case.
I think Vince screwed Bret because he thought WCW would screw him.
Well, I'm really glad you finally said the words Vince screwed Bret. So I guess that concludes the show because you've admitted that I'm right. Vince is at fault.
I think what happened was Vince screwing Bret. I think Vince, by the way in which he painted himself and Shawn and Bret into a corner, literally he had no other option but to do what he did.
I would just say in summation of my point, Vince didn't have to give him the contract that he gave him, which put reasonable creative control in the contract.
But I think he did that with good intentions.
Maybe, but he didn't have to. He gave him reasonable creative control. He gave him the contract that he then wanted to get out of. He reneged on the contract. He thought of the idea to screw him. He screwed him. And and then Triple H also. He should get like the the aiding and abetting charge, I think. But he's the idea man. If it was a good thing and they were going to make $1 billion off it, he'd want the credit, right? So he should get the blame. He thought of it. It was
Funny
his
enough,
idea.
it was $1 billion idea. After that, he did become a billionaire.
Yeah. Take the credit, not the blame, right?
Yeah. So obviously, thank you so much, DK, for joining this episode.
So much fun. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Rayshawn, you were great as always. Thank you so much to Craig, the best EP in the business. Stay tuned for episode 3 of Cheap Heat, where we preview the upcoming Royal Rumble. We talk about our best Royal Rumble memories, and we'll go on from there. So for TK Sizzle, Dave Clarke, Rayshawn Buchanan, Craig D'Alessandro, I am Michael Marcangelo signing off. This was episode 2 of Cheap Heat.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Missing the Point. Missing the Point is a 1-hour weekly podcast recapping the biggest stories in the world of sports with a New England flavor. The show notes and transcript from today's show can be found in the description box below, as well as on our website, www.mtpshow.com. If you're new to the show, and like what you heard, consider subscribing. It's the easiest way to see when we publish new episodes. We are on iTunes, Spotify, Google, and wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to rate us and leave a review of any of our shows. We always appreciate your feedback. Let us know how we're doing and how we can sound better. Also, be sure to follow us on all of our social medias. All of our links will be in the show notes. And check out our brand new website, www.mtpshow.com. That's mtpshow.com. For all of us here at Missing the Point, I'm Craig D'Alessandro. We'll talk to you next time.
Are you passionate about saving the planet for future generations? Do you want to learn how to do it? If yes, then you need to tune in to the Nature Back podcast. It's a talk show covering the changing world around us, from renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, circular economy, to ESG and social innovation. Don't miss this opportunity to discover how you can join the movement and make a difference. Subscribe to the Nature Back podcast today on your favorite platform and get ready to be amazed.
Hey, it's Tim from 50 Years of Music with 50-Year-Old White Guys, the comedy podcast you had no idea you needed. Join Ben, Jeff, and me as we continue our musical road trip back through the years and around the globe. See, just when you thought all white guys were like Joe Rogan, you come across 3 educators trying to remember when we were cool.
50 Years of Music with 50-Year-Old White Guys.
Electricast. Electricast.